like most Americans, I just couldn't bring myself to go see the Goldfinch this weekend. And I think the pictures behind you, the faces on these people's Ansel, Elgort, and who's next to him there?
I don't know his name.
Yeah, it kind of says it all. I think that's how a lot of people are looking at the Goldfinch, with kind of just shock at how this went from being a potential Oscar-worthy movie, or a movie that looked like it was going to get a lot of Oscar buzz, to being maybe one of the biggest flops in the last couple of years.
Right. Yeah.
How do we get there?
It's an adaptation of a best-selling novel, The Goldfinch, that literally
Pulitzer
won
Prize winning, I think.
Pulitzer Prize for Fiction in 2014. Yeah. And John Crowley directed this, who last did Brooklyn, which had 3 Oscar nominations.
Mm-hmm.
So you'd think that everyone's making a power play here for some prestige. And I haven't read The Goldfinch, obviously, but from what I've gathered, this movie is kind of really faithful as an adaptation. It's a long movie, 2.5 hours. I think it's an 800-page book almost, but it makes a few mistakes, which I'll get into. But as you said, this movie is not just any bomb. It's literally the 6th worst opening weekend for a movie that opened in at least 2,500 theaters. $2.6 million opening weekend, and the budget was $40 million because this takes place in Amsterdam and New York City and Vegas, and they shot in Albuquerque instead of Vegas, but still there's multiple shoots, so expensive movie. And bad time for WB, because Blinded by the Light also didn't do well. The Kitchen didn't do well. Shaft didn't do well. Godzilla underperformed. It too do well though for them, and Joker will do well. But overall, WB bad run right now. But yeah, so people have really been dumping on movies since it premiered at TIFF, and I think it's easy to say the movie's trash, the movie stinks, blah 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 blah. But I mean, to be fair to it, I think it's important to actually explain why. And what really stood out to me is the editing. The book is more or less very linear from what I've gathered, yet the movie isn't. We flash back. We start with Ansel Elgort playing the adult version of the character, lead character, in Amsterdam, and we flash back and we have big chunks of his childhood, and then there's memory sequences revolving around the inciting incident in the story, which is a bombing at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City, which kills Ansel's mom. And it just felt unintentionally unnecessarily all over the place. And the stuff with the kids, the young actors, is really, really long. Like Ansel is, sold as the lead of this movie and all the marketing, right, and trailers. We don't get a lot of Ansel until over halfway through, to be honest. And he's hardly a problem. I know a lot of people are talking about, is Ansel Elgort actually a movie star? Blah blah blah. He's fine in the role. I don't know the character from the page, but he was fine in it. But the story just honestly there's no pulse to it, man. It's just really lifeless. And the whole point, I'm not going to spoil it, but like the whole point about his mom and the meaning of the Goldfinch painting, it just doesn't really seem to land what kind of point they're trying to get across. And the whole twist, which I won't spoil, once it happens, you're just like, oh, okay, fine, whatever. And the guy you're seeing on my screen, the adult version, Finn Wolfhard's character, Boris. Finn Wolfhard is bad as Boris, young Boris. He's a really bad Russian accent. He was, I think, just miscast a little bit because he's playing this guy that kind of exposes Ansel Elgort's character, young character, to drugs and crime and stuff, and just tough. Characters that do work. I think Nicole Kidman was pretty good as the his surrogate mom briefly after the bombing. Luke Wilson plays his deadbeat dad. So he's all right. More interesting was Luke Wilson's girlfriend, played by Sarah Paulson, playing really off-type for what we expect from Sarah Paulson. She's kind of this grimy trophy girlfriend, kind of seedy woman. Really good though. She really chewed on it. So I like Sarah Paulson a lot in this role. And I think she did as much as she could. Jeffrey Wright talks, I think, really deeply and profoundly without actually saying much in the movie.
Sounds like his part on Westworld.
Incredibly similar, actually. Good call. Yeah, it's just it's engaging kind of the whole time, but and I think if the editing was tighter, we trimmed this movie a little bit. It's kind of got a weird ensemble, rich ensemble of various characters. Not most of them are not famous actors, but you kind of forget. Like you meet the adult characters of people you knew as kids, and you have to like guess in your head, oh, that's that kid. Like because you don't actually know at first when you're watching. It's a little confusing. But yeah, I think overall the themes about love and meaning and holding on to things that keep you going just did not land for me in film form. So I think the movie just kind of just a bit of a slog overall, and tough beat for WB. What I actually find most interesting about this movie is that this was a co-production by Warner Brothers and Amazon, really the first of its kind, where Amazon fronted about I think 20-30% of the initial production budget, in exchange for having the exclusive film rights on streaming. Naturally, Warner Brothers would normally have put this movie on HBO, their own streaming service. So kind of an interesting thing where a mid-budget movie, $40 million, could be financed by having people split the cost around, right, and selling off the streaming. Now, obviously, this movie was not a success. So will this arrangement work? You have to figure. I mean, this movie's been in the work for several years. Obviously, I mean, John Crowley made Brooklyn in 2015. It's been a while, right? Will a deal like this come up again? Tough remains to be seen. I think now Warner Brothers with HBO Max probably wouldn't do this again, but Lionsgate, Paramount, Focus, some of those smaller distributors, maybe they would partner with a Netflix or a Amazon. You know, I'm curious to see if this kind of arrangement can perhaps keep the middle tier movie going, as we've talked about in recent weeks. But the Goldfinch, I saw at 3 p.m. on a Sunday, on opening weekend, and I was one of 3 people there. It's just
not great.
I was not interested in the film. Ansel Elgort, we'll see him next year, and Steven Spielberg's West Side Story. Interesting. But yeah Goldfinch, major L for all parties.
Yeah, tough. Sounds like Sarah Paulson is really, and of course the Queen from God, I can't think of her. Nicole Kidman. I'm sorry, name flew out my head. Sounds like they're the only two that kind of leave this unscathed in a sense. If any of them got out unscathed.